Alrighty, it's leak time again. Leaks covering the next Pokemon games, Pokemon Wind and Wave. Now, the ones I'm going to be going over today do come from Twitter, so of course take it with a grain of salt. But what's contained in this mega thread of leaks very much lines up with what we saw previously. And if you don't know about what we saw previously, then I would highly recommend going to check out the previous video I did on that. I'll put a link in the description below. That'll sort of catch you up to speed, but I'll do my best here to sort of bridge the gap either way. So if you didn't already know, the next Pokemon games are going to be Pokemon Wind and Wave, with the region inspired by Indonesia and South Asia. The world is going to be very island-centric, with now one of those islands being procedurally generated. Previously, from the last batch of leaks, it seemed like the world was going to be mostly procedurally generated, with a lot of different areas to go to, and then you'd have, of course, like your set pieces between them. But one of the first biggest red flags that I saw with these leaks is that, yes, they have scaled down the sort of main gimmick of the game. The idea of a largely procedurally generated world has been abandoned, and now we have only one procedurally generated island, changing in appearance every time you visit it. In the previous batch of leaks, the theme of infinity was something that was floated around, but that might not be the case now if that's only going to be limited to one island. They may have largely abandoned that theme. The starter Pokemon will be encountered on a small dedicated island, not chosen immediately in the classic way, but more or less towards the beginning of the game, not too dissimilar from what we've seen thus far. Another reference to the previous batch of leaks is seen in the Pokemon Seed concept, which has now been heavily reduced. And now it seems like that entire concept may have been moved entirely to the upcoming Pokemon MMO game. Again, if you haven't seen my previous video, I would highly recommend watching it because it'll explain a lot of what I'm talking about here. Something very important to point out about the new games is that all the Pokemon will have new models. Now, this is a good thing, largely, but unfortunately you have some of the weird ones like the Pikachu that we've seen not quite hitting the mark with a lot of people, including myself. But I'll dive more into my opinion on all of this in the later half of this video. Some quality of life improvements. Pokemon will now use environmental HM moves autonomously, so they'll just do it. You don't have to go through the menu over and over. So that's cool, I guess. Environmental test systems. We've seen these before. A lot of test systems for water, whirlpools, waterfalls, depths, mountains, erosion, Pokemon reacting to specific terrain, and petting / interacting with the Pokemon in general. It does seem like, especially when it comes to the nature side of the game, that they really want to get it right. In the previous batch of footage, we actually did see the tests for those water systems, and they looked pretty decent overall, to be honest. Now here's a controversial one, Poke-Ride. There will now be a Rotom scooter. Instead of the Poke-Ride where you were supposed to be able to ride every Pokemon in this game, it's now been reduced to a Rotom scooter that's connected to the majority, if not all of the Pokemon. But you'll have direct control of the Pokemon, not the trainer, like the Synchro minigame in Gen 9. Using the Rotom scooter, you'll be able to move at different speeds, in different flight altitudes, as well as the depth of terrain, it would seem. And it all depends on the Pokemon that you ride it with. Another thing was the Oasis. The game Pokemon Pokopia was originally a major minigame inside of Gen 10 set on a procedural island, but it has been removed and it will be developed as a standalone game, or has been developed as Pokopia as we know it now. It was initially designed as a management minigame, so that's now going to be a standalone game, separate purchase entirely. It won't be a part of Gen 10. Some of the larger areas include a capital city, wetlands, grasslands, volcano, desert, snowfield, and Area 50, which is likely the procedurally generated island that we talked about previously. It'll be its own separate area. The Pokemon gym types will be Dark, Poison, Fairy, Normal, Steel, Fighting, Flying, and Grass. And a new battle mechanic will be present in this game called Majin, spelled M-A-J-I-N. I hope I said that correctly. What we know about it is that the Pokemon will be surrounded by an aura. Pokemon constantly change appearance, with a dynamic shader effect applied. It'll be a generic mechanic usable by anyone, like Terra. It'll be type-based, and it'll be linked to cloud-based weather phenomenon. There can be different aura colors and animations per the existing type, and their written description says that the recent leak shows a Pikachu with a red aura and shader resembling lava bubbles, likely Fire Majin. An electric Majin would have a yellow aura with a zigzag animation. So you can kind of go crazy thinking about what this means. They seem to think that it'll affect the actual battlefield itself, with, dynamic sort of terrain, or with whatever type it is, it'll affect the battle in its own unique way, depending on the type. But none of that is confirmed. So yeah, we're getting another very simple battle mechanic. You know, we had Dynamax, we had Megas, we had Terra, we had this and that and that and that. Now this is their new thing. Personally, I don't understand what was wrong with the original battle format. I don't know why there always has to be a gimmick involved. I really wish we could get back down to the basics, the pure Pokemon battles. The gimmicks like this tend to make it a whole different game entirely, and the meta with it. But at this point, that seems like the least of the problems, because there's so much cut content here. They have removed so many of the features that people were excited for, and it seems like a lot of them have been pushed into different projects, which just begs the question, when are we getting the good Pokemon games? Because if all these features keep getting pushed into other games, you know, like, oh, let's cut that, let's put that in a future game, oh, that thing, let's take that away and make that its own spin-off, blah, blah, blah. Well, what are we left with then? A single procedurally generated island and a battle mechanic that involves weather. And yes, you were supposed to previously be able to have a seed Pokemon in these games where it would sort of shift and change with each player as you went through the game. But now that's being cut and put into the Pokemon MMO game. And if you didn't know, in the original batch of leaks, there were multiple games outlined, not just this one. There was Pokemon Wind and Waves, there was a Pokemon Legends game that sort of had you using multiple Pokemon to take down bigger ones. Kind of maybe like Pikmin. That's a very, very, very loose and probably inaccurate description, but kind of like that. And then we were supposed to be getting a Pokemon MMO, which still seems like that's on track to happen, but now a lot of the features from this game are being cut and pushed into those other games. And so if they're going to constantly take away features from their current project and just sort of, you know, shove them along down the assembly line, then it does make each release feel empty. A lot of people did not like Pokemon Legends ZA for a lot of obvious reasons. You can tell the game was not built with love. You can tell the game was not finished. You can tell the game needed a lot more care and attention to detail. But GameFreak currently operates like a factory. And if one of the little pieces is not fitting exactly right in like a very small time frame, they just go, okay, get rid of it. Push it to the next thing. And so the whole concept of the game itself sort of gets lost, because now you only have bits and pieces of what you initially had envisioned. You can't ride the Pokemon. You can't explore large procedurally generated areas. Now that's only limited to one area, which personally, I don't think that's the biggest issue here. I don't have an issue with them scaling back procedural generation. However, if they do that later in the game, then that means they have less time to actually handcraft the areas that are going to make up the majority of the game. And if they don't do it well, if they rush it, which they very well might have to, then you're going to end up with a Pokemon Legends ZA situation again, where the game does not look good. It doesn't look finished. It will feel hollow and empty. The problem is they can't seem to commit to an idea. If they wanted to go for a majority procedurally generated Pokemon game, that could have done well if they did it right. But now it's only a little area, and the rest of the game is going to be just a standard Pokemon game. It's like, well, what was the point? Why is that even a thing now if it's going to be relegated to just a small tacked on portion of the game? The theme of the games was supposed to be infinity, but now it seems like it's regular game and then infinity kind of tacked on, you know, as like a footnote, which now it feels like that's just there to pad out the game time, to make the game feel like there's more to do in it than there really is. It seems like they keep having these grand ideas, like in Pokemon Legends ZA. Okay, let's have a whole game, a whole Pokemon game, take place inside one city. That is a very bold idea, but it absolutely could work. It could be the best thing ever, but they didn't go all the way with it. They like started to do it, they kind of did it, and then because they have so many projects going on, they just couldn't finish it. And they try to compensate for it by having the Pokemon games now focus on characters rather than the actual substance of the games, the actual Pokemon, the actual adventure. The Pokemon games have always had some unique characters, but it's never been the main core focus. But lately, it doesn't even seem like I can say that now, because it does seem like it's the focus, which is something I criticized in a previous video. It boggled my mind because they have the best characters on the planet. They have the most iconic creatures, the most iconic things to use to push a game's narrative or to draw people in, and that's Pokemon. But they get so lost in the sauce, they start making all these weird things that they can't finish or that they can't actually see through. And so at the very end, they go, okay, well, we need some strong characters to sort of make this feel like a real adventure, I guess. And then they just slap them on in. Because in none of the leaks do they ever mention characters. It's something that absolutely comes last. Whereas in a lot of character-heavy games, that's something that comes, you know, first, or it's like a step 2 or 3 or something. But here, You don't see it at all, which would make sense because it's a Pokemon game. But then when the actual trailers come out, you see a bunch of characters, you see a bunch of talking, and then you play the game and it's a bunch of yapping and it's a bunch of over tutorializing, and really it just makes the game not feel like Pokemon. It's now a very hand-holdy experience that doesn't actually let you play the game. You'll get little moments, but with each release, with each subsequent game that comes out, those moments become smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's a problem that a lot of people are having. And so if you want to have an idea, like making the whole world procedurally generated, making the Pokemon itself that you start off with, not your starter, but a seed Pokemon, something that is also procedurally generated as you explore, that could work out. But you didn't stick with it. You backed out. You got cold feet, or you realized that it was a tall order. And so instead of looking at it and going, yeah, that's a tall order, but hey, we're GameFreak. We have Pokemon, the biggest IP on the planet. We have no excuse but to make this game good. They go, just cut it or just push it to a different game. Whatever. Like, that's crazy. That is insane. All I'm trying to say is that if most of your planned features end up getting removed, then you should probably take a long look at yourself and realize that you should slow down, put more care into the games, put more attention into them. But that will never happen because if people buy these games, despite all the flaws, despite the rushed development, they are going to be rewarded for this approach of just assembly line pushing these games out. It's got to change at some point, but it can only do so if people stop buying these games. You have to be able to resist the temptation when they show a trailer where you can pet a Charizard. You have to realize that they're just showing you what you want to see. If you want to wait until after release and you still think that the game is worth buying, then fair enough. You know, maybe you saw some gameplay and maybe you made your mind up, but absolutely do not pre-order this game. Do not incentivize them to keep cutting corners. The only way we're going to get good Pokemon games, you know, whether it's in this direction or that direction or in this weird concept, any of those things, but whatever the direction, for them to be good, they have to slow down. This is Pokemon we're talking about. Pokemon is the biggest entertainment franchise on the earth. There is no excuse why the games should be lackluster, why the games should look terrible, why they should run terribly, why they should lack content. The developers are being lazy again. It's happening again. It's going to be another Legends ZA situation again. And it's only going to change if people take their head out of the sand and stand up for themselves and go, you know what? Yeah, they could have done this better. So if you're interested in these next Pokemon games, if you're interested in the future of Pokemon in general, then I highly suggest that you should be very scrutinous with how you spend your money. Because if you keep just rewarding them for doing the bare minimum, they're only going to do just that. In any case, my name is Goobles. Thank you very much for watching. Please consider subscribing and have a Goob day.